I never expected that a citywide power outage would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when the man from apartment 4B knocked on my door holding a portable charger. Life has a funny way of working out, I suppose. It takes something as dramatic as plunging an entire city block into darkness to illuminate what's been right in front of you the whole time. For me, that something, that someone, was Caleb. Let me take you back. Before the storm, my life was a carefully curated collection of routines. I'm Lucas, a graphic designer who works from home, which is a polite way of saying my commute is a 10-step shuffle from my bed to my desk. My apartment was my sanctuary, a fortress of solitude built with quiet mornings, the gentle hum of my computer, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I liked my life. It was predictable, it was safe, and it was, if I'm being completely honest with myself, profoundly lonely. It was a loneliness that hummed just beneath the surface, a low-frequency ache I'd gotten used to, like a bad back or a tooth that's sensitive to cold. I'd fill the silence with podcasts and ambient music playlists, creating a soundscape that mimicked companionship. I had friends, of course, but our interactions were mostly digital, scheduled video calls, and rapid-fire text exchanges. The physical world, the one that existed outside my windows and beyond my front door, often felt like a movie I was watching from a great distance. My apartment building was a character in itself. An old, four-story brick walk-up with floors that groaned underfoot and pipes that clanked with operatic drama. It had personality, which was a real estate agent's term for being in a constant state of gentle decay. But it was home. I knew the rhythm of the place. The mail carrier's heavy tread in the afternoon, the scent of Mrs. Gable's pot roast from 4D on Sundays, and the sound of Caleb's boots on the stairs. Ah, Caleb. He lived in 4B, right across the hall. He was a piece of the building's ambient noise that I'd paid far too much attention to. He was a study in contrasts to my quiet, indoor existence. I'd see him coming and going, his frame solid and broad, often with a fine layer of sawdust clinging to his dark hair or the shoulders of his flannel shirt. He moved with a purpose I envied, his steps sure and heavy, his presence filling the narrow hallway. From my observations, I had pieced together a story for him. He was a contractor, I decided, or maybe he worked in construction. He was always carrying something: toolboxes, long planks of wood, mysterious heavy objects shrouded in canvas. He seemed confident, grounded, the kind of man who knew how to fix things, who could probably build a house with his bare hands. He was, in the cinematic landscape of my imagination, the ruggedly handsome hero who was utterly and completely out of my league. Our interactions were minimal, limited to the brief, neighborly exchanges that punctuate apartment life. A nod in the laundry room. A hey, as he held the heavy front door for me when my arms were full of groceries. He had a nice smile, a slow-spreading warmth that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, the color of a summer sky just after a rainstorm. I knew this because I'd cataloged the detail during one of our 2-second encounters, filing it away in the part of my brain reserved for hopeless pining. I assumed, with the certainty of a man well-versed in self-protection, that he was straight. It was a default setting, a safety measure to keep my foolish heart from getting any wild ideas. He had the easy confidence of a man who moved through the world without the kind of anxieties that plagued me. He was unattainable, a fixed point in the constellation of my building, beautiful to look at from a distance, but impossibly far away. I was content, or so I told myself, to simply appreciate the view. My routine was my armor. Wake up, coffee, work, lunch, work, dinner, streaming service, sleep. Repeat. It was a loop, a comfortable and predictable pattern that kept the loneliness at bay. It was a life lived in grayscale, and I hadn't realized how much I was yearning for color until the day the sky broke open and the lights went out. That day started like any other. The sky had been a moody, bruised purple all morning, threatening a storm that the weather app promised would be significant. I barely noticed. I was deep in a project, tweaking the kerning on a new logo, lost in the digital world of pixels and vectors. The first rumble of thunder was a distant growl, easily ignored. But as the afternoon wore on, the growl deepened into a roar. The rain started, a gentle tapping that soon escalated into a furious drumming against my window panes. The lights flickered once, twice, I kept working, foolishly assuming the city's infrastructure would hold. And then, with a final, apologetic buzz from the refrigerator, my apartment was plunged into an unnerving silence. My monitors went black. The ambient music died. The only sounds were the raging storm outside and the sudden, frantic thumping of my own heart. A power outage. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a welcome beacon in the sudden gloom. 18% battery. Of course. My portable power bank, my trusty emergency companion, was sitting on my desk, its single blinking light telling me it was nearly as drained as my phone. I'd forgotten to charge it last night. It was a rookie mistake for a seasoned homebody like me. Let me explain something about living alone. The quiet you cultivate is different from the quiet that is forced upon you. My chosen silence was peaceful. This new silence was heavy, oppressive. It felt like the world had stopped holding its breath. I lit a few candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. My fortress of solitude suddenly felt more like a cage. I sat on my sofa, watching the battery percentage on my phone tick down like a doomsday clock. 15%. I scrolled through social media for updates. The posts a frantic chorus of "power out here too. And anyone know when it's coming back?" The utility company's website reported a massive outage with no estimated time for restoration. It could be hours. It could be the entire night. 10%. I gave up on the internet and decided to conserve what little power I had left for a true emergency. I put the phone down and was left with nothing but my thoughts and the symphony of the storm. The rain lashed against the building, and the wind howled a mournful, lonely song. It was only 5 in the afternoon, but the sky was so dark it felt like midnight. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, feeling small and very, very isolated. And then, my phone, which I'd picked up again just to feel its comforting weight in my hand, gave a final, sad little buzz and went dark. The last link to the outside world was severed. The silence in the apartment deepened, becoming absolute. It was in that profound, unnerving quiet that I heard it. A sound from outside my door. A firm, deliberate knock. My heart leaped into my throat. Who would be knocking on my door in the middle of a blackout? My mind raced through a list of unlikely scenarios. But then I heard a voice, slightly muffled by the door. "Hello? Anyone home? Just checking on everyone." The voice was familiar, deep, calm. It was Caleb. I scrambled to the door, fumbling with the deadbolt in the dark. I pulled it open to find him standing in the hallway, his silhouette illuminated by the beam of a powerful flashlight he held in one hand. In his other hand was a black and orange box, about the size of a small cooler, with various plugs and ports on the front. He looked concerned, his brow furrowed. "Hey," he said, his voice softer now that we were face to face. "You okay in there?" The whole grid's down. I could only nod, my own voice momentarily abandoning me. I was suddenly aware of my state, wrapped in a blanket, my hair probably a mess, my apartment looking like a seance in progress with its scattered, flickering candles. "Yeah," I managed to squeak out, clearing my throat. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just dark." It was a stupid thing to say, but my brain was short-circuiting. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'll say. I was just checking on Mrs. Gable, making sure she had enough candles. Then I figured I'd knock on your door too." "Got this thing," he said, hoisting the box slightly. "It's a portable power station. For camping. Figured someone might need a charge." He looked past me into the dark apartment, then back at my face. "Your phone dead." It was as if he'd read my mind, or perhaps just my panicked expression. Yeah, actually," I admitted, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "It died about 10 minutes ago." "Well, bring it out," he offered. "You can plug it in out here. Or you could come in." The words left my mouth before I had a chance to stop them. It was a bold move for me, an impulsive deviation from my carefully constructed script of avoidance. "I mean, if you want. So you don't have to stand in the hallway." A flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher crossed his face before he smiled again, wider this time. "Yeah, okay. Thanks." He stepped over the threshold, and my small apartment suddenly felt even smaller, charged with a new and unfamiliar energy. He placed the power station on my coffee table, the hum of its internal fan a welcome intrusion into the silence. "Here," he said, pointing to a USB port. I retrieved my dead phone and a cable, my hands fumbling slightly as I plugged it in. The screen lit up, showing the charging symbol. The relief was immediate and immense. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Seriously, you're a lifesaver." "No problem," he replied, pulling his own phone from his pocket. "Mind if I juice up too?" "I'm at like 5%. He plugged his phone in next to mine. And just like that, there we were, side by side in the candlelight, tethered to the same power source, waiting for our digital lifelines to be resurrected. The storm raged on outside, but inside my apartment, a different kind of quiet had settled. It was no longer empty. It was shared. The initial moments were filled with the kind of polite, slightly awkward silence that happens when two strangers are suddenly confined to a small space. I busied myself with adjusting the candles, while Caleb looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the artwork I had hanging on the walls. The hum of the power station and the drumming of the rain were the only sounds between us. "So, you're a graphic designer, right?" Caleb asked, breaking the quiet. I was taken aback. "Oh yeah? How did you know that?" He gestured vaguely toward my door. "Saw a package for you once. Had one of those fancy design software company logos on it. Just put two and two together." He gave a small, almost sheepish shrug. It was an oddly observant detail, and it made my stomach do a little flip. He had noticed something about me. "Right?" I said, trying to sound casual. "That's me. I work from home. Stare at a screen all day." "I get that," he said, leaning back on the sofa. "Except my screen is usually a piece of wood," he chuckled. "I figured you for a contractor or something," I admitted. "Always carrying tools and lumber." "Close," he said. "I'm a furniture maker. I have a workshop downtown." He started talking about his work, and the transformation was captivating. The reserved, quiet neighbor disappeared, replaced by a passionate craftsman. He spoke about the unique character of different woods, the deep, rich grain of walnut, the surprising flexibility of ash, the way a piece of maple feels like silk after it's been sanded. He talked about the satisfaction of taking raw materials and shaping them into something both beautiful and functional. I listened, completely engrossed. This was a side of him I never could have imagined. My mental picture of the stoic, rugged construction worker was dissolving, replaced by the far more compelling image of a thoughtful artist. He wasn't just building things, he was creating them. There was a vulnerability in the way he spoke about his craft, a reverence for the process that I understood completely. It mirrored the way I felt about my own work, about finding the perfect color palette or aligning elements into a harmonious whole. "What about you?" he asked, turning the tables. "What kind of stuff do you design?" "Oh, I stammered, "mostly corporate stuff. Logos, brochures, website layouts. It pays the bills." His gaze drifted to a large print hanging above my television. It was one of my own pieces, a personal project, an abstract swirl of blues and grays, and a single, sharp line of electric gold. It was a visual representation of the feeling of a quiet city street just before dawn. I'd never shown it to anyone. "Did you make that?" he asked, his voice soft with genuine curiosity. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Sharing my personal work always felt like exposing a piece of my soul. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just something I was playing around with." He stood up and walked closer to it, studying it in the flickering candlelight. I held my breath. "I like it," he said, his back still to me. "It feels calm. But there's something hopeful about it, too. That gold line." He turned back to look at me, his blue eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. "It's really good, Lucas." He said my name. It was the first time, I think. And the way he said it, combined with the sincere appreciation for my art, sent a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the candles. That was the moment. The small, significant moment where the dynamic between us shifted. He wasn't just my neighbor anymore. He was someone who saw a part of me I kept hidden, and he didn't just glance at it. He looked, and he understood. We kept talking. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a surprising ease. The storm outside became a backdrop to our conversation, its fury making my small, candlelit living room feel like a protected haven. We moved from our work to other things, our favorite movies, the worst jobs we'd ever had, the eternal debate of city life versus country life. He told me he grew up in a small town in Oregon, surrounded by forests, which is where his love for wood came from. I told him I was a city kid through and through, born and raised just a few miles from where we now sat. Our phones sat on the coffee table, slowly drinking up power, their screens glowing between us like a shared campfire. I found myself hoping they would charge as slowly as possible. Caleb's phone finished first. It chirped, signaling a full battery. My heart did a pathetic little dip. This was it. The reason for his visit was officially over. He would unplug his phone, say his thanks and goodbyes, and disappear back across the hall into his own dark apartment. The bubble would pop. I braced myself for the return of the heavy, oppressive silence. He reached over and unplugged his phone. He slipped it into his pocket. But then he did something I didn't expect. He didn't move. He just settled back into the sofa, lacing his fingers behind his head and looking at me. "So," he said, as if nothing had changed, "you were telling me about that time you accidentally dyed your hair orange in college." My phone was still only at 70%. He could have left. He had his lifeline back. But he stayed. He chose to stay. The action was so simple, so quiet, but it resonated through the room with the force of a thunderclap. It was a conscious decision to remain in my company, without pretext or obligation. My own phone finally announced it was fully charged about an hour later. Now there were no more excuses. The entire purpose of this encounter, the practical transaction of borrowing electricity, was complete. Both our lifelines were restored. The silence that fell between us this time was different. It wasn't awkward. It was charged, full of unspoken things. I looked at him, and he was already looking at me. In the flickering light, his expression was open, searching. "You know," he said, his voice low and intimate, a stark contrast to the howling wind outside. It's kind of nice, just talking. Better than sitting alone in the dark." That was the turning point. That was the moment everything tilted on its axis. With that one sentence, he reached across the space between us and mirrored the exact feeling I'd been wrestling with all evening, all year, maybe my whole adult life. It was an admission of loneliness, a confession that he felt it too. He wasn't the unflappable, self-assured man I had imagined. He was just a person, sitting in the dark, who didn't want to be alone. Just like me. I couldn't find any words. I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. We sat there for another long while, not speaking at all. The storm began to subside, its fury softening into a steady, rhythmic rainfall. The silence was no longer empty. It was full. It was full of the quiet understanding that we had both chosen to be here, in this small, warm space, together. He didn't have to say anything else. Staying was the message. Eventually, very late into the night, the spell had to break. Caleb stretched, a soft groan escaping his lips. "Well," he said, his voice thick with sleepiness, "I should probably let you get some rest." He stood up, and the room instantly felt emptier. I stood up too, a reluctant host walking his guest to the door. At the threshold, he paused. The air was thick with things left unsaid. "Thanks for letting me hang out," he said, which felt like a colossal understatement. "Thanks for the charge," I replied, which felt equally inadequate. "And the company." He gave me a small, tired smile. "See you around, Lucas." And then he was gone, his door clicking shut across the hall, leaving me alone in my apartment, which was now both incredibly full and painfully empty at the same time. I leaned my back against my closed door, my mind reeling. The power was still out, but I felt like every light inside of me had just been switched on. The power came back on with a jolt in the middle of the night. The refrigerator hummed to life. The digital clock on the oven blinked a frantic 12 o'clock, and a lamp I'd left on in the corner flooded the room with sudden, harsh light. The magic of the blackout was officially over. The world was back to normal, but nothing felt normal to me. I spent the entire next day in a fog of overanalysis. My mind was a relentless loop, replaying every moment from the night before. I dissected every word, every gesture, every shared silence. Caleb stayed. He stayed after his phone was charged. He stayed after my phone was charged. He said it was better than sitting alone in the dark. What did it mean? My internal monologue was a frantic debate between two opposing lawyers. Hope, the optimistic one, argued that this was clearly a sign of mutual interest. He sought me out. He opened up. He chose to stay. It was a clear-cut case of burgeoning romance. Fear, the cynical veteran, countered with cold, hard logic. He was just being neighborly. He was lonely during a storm, and you were a convenient port. Don't read into it. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. It was a classic case of proximity breeding false intimacy. Every time I felt a surge of giddy optimism, the fear would yank me back to earth. He was just being nice. That's what kind people do. I was projecting my own feelings onto a simple act of kindness. The memory of the way he looked at me in the candlelight felt vivid and real one moment, then like a figment of my wishful imagination the next. Had his gaze really softened, or was it just a trick of the low light? This internal turmoil made leaving my apartment a high-stakes endeavor. A simple trip to the laundry room felt fraught with peril. What if I saw him? What would I say? How should I act? Should I be cool and casual, or should I acknowledge the weird, wonderful intimacy of the night before? The inevitable encounter happened the following afternoon. I was taking out my recycling, and as I stepped into the hall, his door opened. We almost collided. "Oh, hey," he said a little too quickly. "Hey," I replied, my voice equally strained. An ocean of unspoken words lay between us in that narrow hallway. The easy intimacy we'd shared in the dark was gone, replaced by a brittle, humming tension. We both looked away at the same time, me at the scuffed floorboards, him at the ceiling. The silence stretched for an agonizing 3 seconds. "Well, see ya," he mumbled, moving past me down the stairs. "Yeah, you too," I said to his retreating back. I stood there for a long moment after he was gone, my heart sinking like a stone. It was just as the cynical lawyer had predicted. It was awkward. He was avoiding eye contact. The spell was broken, and now we were just two neighbors who had shared a weirdly intense evening and didn't know how to act around each other anymore. I had imagined it all. The hope that had been soaring inside me crashed and burned, leaving nothing but the bitter smoke of embarrassment. I had been a fool. For the next 2 days, I was a ghost. I holed up in my apartment, turning the music up a little louder to drown out the sounds from the hallway. I actively avoided the times I knew Caleb was likely to be coming or going. The brief, awkward encounter had confirmed my worst fears, and I was now in full emotional retreat. The fortress of solitude was rebuilt, its walls thicker and higher than ever before. I told myself it was for the best. It was easier this way, safer. The ache of loneliness was a familiar pain, far more manageable than the sharp, fresh sting of rejection. But here's the thing about hope. Even when you think it's extinguished, a tiny ember can remain, glowing stubbornly in the dark. A small part of me still clung to the memory of his confession, better than sitting alone in the dark, that had felt real. His interest in my art had felt real. The comfortable silence we shared had felt real. Was I really going to let one awkward hallway interaction erase all of that? I was in the middle of this internal tug-of-war, sipping my morning coffee and staring blankly at a design project, when it happened again. A knock on the door. It was firm, deliberate. The exact same knock as before. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. I froze, my coffee cup hovering halfway to my lips. The knock came again, a little more insistent this time. Taking a deep breath, I set my cup down and walked to the door, my socked feet silent on the wood floor. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I pulled the door open, my mind racing with 100 different things to say. There he was, Caleb. He was standing there in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, his hands shoved nervously into his pockets. He wasn't holding a power station or a flashlight. He was just there. He looked as anxious as I felt, his blue eyes wide and his mouth set in a thin, determined line. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. Can I talk to you for a second?" I swallowed hard and nodded, stepping back to let him in. He walked into the living room, the same space where we had shared the candlelit vigil, but he didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, rubbing the back of his neck. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, leaving no shadows for either of us to hide in. "Okay," he started, taking a deep breath as if about to plunge into cold water. "Let me explain about the other day. In the hall. I was weird. I'm sorry. It's okay," I said quickly. "I was weird too." "No, He shook his head, looking at the floor before forcing his gaze back to mine. "I've been replaying that night over and over in my head, and then I acted like a complete idiot when I saw you. I just